Hello all. I hope you're all keeping well. Obviously, that's the main aim of us all being hidden away inside. Yes, I hope you're all keeping yourself all safely tucked in and that everybody's safe and well. This is an idea of Dan Heath's to give you something to watch to break the isolation of, the monotony of the isolation, and to have these brief little snippets of history of London. It gives me something to do as well. So, yes, I've been given free rein to do the first of these recordings from, I'm in my back garden here in Beckenham. So I've chosen the Banqueting House. So, Banqueting House is somewhere that we regularly drive past. It doesn't take many people's eye. Most eyes are generally on the opposite side of the road looking at the horse guards. If anybody is looking out the window of a cab rather than staring at their mobile phone. But tourists would never know that it was a building of any importance or structure. Obviously, running down from Trafalgar Square, which everybody's heard of, and then at the far end, Parliament Square, has a Parliament at Westminster Abbey. But Whitehall is an immensely important street, not just today, because again, as I mentioned to most tourists, this is the centre of British government, but in terms of its importance going back to the 16th and 17th centuries, Henry VIII, when marrying his brother's sister, his dead brother's sister, King Arthur's wife, Catherine of Aragon, in order to firstly to make a link between Spain to keep the lines open between us and the Spanish. It actually turns out that Henry did have strong feelings for Catherine anyway, Catherine of Aragon, and so he was very eager to marry his brother's wife when Arthur passed away, and they were married for 22 years, which maybe says something about why things changed. Henry was very, very eager to have a son, excuse me, and Catherine had a number of pregnancies. She lost 5 of those pregnancies, and a couple of them were sons. She did have one daughter, Mary. By the time Henry is getting to his mid-30s, that's not quite enough for him. So he marries Catherine at the age of 18, I believe. So he's getting up to his up to his 40s by the time he decides that he's not going to be able to pass his throne on to a son. This then allows him or pushes him to look for somebody new, and there were many women and families in court that wanted who were eager for their daughter or for themselves to become Queen of England. It would have been the first time. This was a very unusual thing. Divorce existed, but you couldn't divorce anybody unless if you had consummated the marriage, and obviously with the birth of Mary and also the stillbirths, Catherine had obviously and Henry had obviously consummated the marriage. But Henry tried. He sent Cardinal Wolsey to speak to the Pope, the head of the only church at that time, the only Christian church, the Roman Catholic Church, to ask for annulment of the marriage, under the guise that Catherine and Arthur, his brother, had consummated the marriage. So therefore, Henry and Catherine were never actually married. Catherine argued that she hadn't had time to consummate the marriage with Arthur, which is difficult to accept, but that was her argument to the Pope. The Pope sided with Catherine, they were good Catholic. She was from good Catholic stock, Spanish family, and said that the annulment or the divorce couldn't go ahead. And so Henry, at that point, decided to make his own church up, Church of England, the Anglican Church. And in doing so, by dissolving the Catholic Church in England, that would then allow him to make his own rules. And obviously, one of those rules were that he could divorce who he liked. And so Catherine was set aside. The divorce was passed by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Henry married a new wife, whose name was Anne Boleyn. Now, Anne and her family were very calculating. This is something that they had worked towards for a long time. And it's said about Anne that she was good at catching the eye of men, shall we say. Her time spent in the French court, she had been living in France for 7 years, gave her an edge. She knew how to just what to wear, how to look, just how to wear her hair, because it was actually custom was that women didn't show their hair. It was a bit immodest. Catherine brought over a new style from France that just showed a small amount of hair below the head covering. And so Henry fell for Catherine. They married. She produced one daughter, just like Catherine of Aragon. Sorry, I mean Anne. Just like Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn produced one daughter, a couple of stillbirths, but no son. For some reason, rather than divorce her when he decided that he was not going to produce him the son that he wanted, he listens to the voices and the people in court that said that Anne Boleyn was having affairs with a number of men, including her own brother. And so he decided that rather than divorce her, he would have her arrested for adultery, and she was found guilty. She was the first of his wives who had her head cut off. Henry then married Jane Seymour. She did give him his son, the son that he'd always wanted, Edward VI. But Jane Seymour died 21 days after giving birth, and so Henry, although he had his son, was now without a queen. But as far as we know, that was enough for Henry. Problems were brewing in Europe by this point, because we had broken from the Catholic Church. The rest of Europe was still Catholic, apart from one small corner of Germany where a man called Martin Luther had started to question the dominance of the Catholic Church. And so there were uprisings against Rome and the Pope in what we would call modern day Germany. And so it made sense to make a link with the German family. So Henry was told that he would marry Anne of Cleves. She'd been found for him, she was a good match, and it would make perfectly good sense for us to have allies in Europe. And so Henry agreed, but with one condition, that he would like to meet her. Not an unusual request to meet your future wife. His courtiers advised against, said there's really no need, she's a very nice girl, very attractive, you'll get on famously with her. But Henry insisted, and so a meeting was arranged. She came over by boat to the Kent coast, and Henry met her at Rochester Castle. His reaction was one of slight disdain. He walked into the room, took a look at her, and then looked at his advisors with a look of, who is this? He saw this reaction and stormed off out of the room, which angered him even more. And then at this point he fell into a tirade of abuse at his advisors. Why have you brought her here? She is ugly and she smells. I don't want her as a wife. But it was already arranged, and it was a necessity to have allies in Europe. And so Henry was forced to marry Anne of Cleves. It didn't work, surprisingly. It lasted 6 months. But Anne was a good friend of Henry's. She became almost like a sister to him and lived the rest of her life in court in a very nice way. Well looked after. Henry, now a big man, he had by this point had an accident, falling off of his horse while jousting. The horse fell on top of him and it damaged his back, which meant that he was in constant pain for the rest of his days. And it also meant he couldn't exercise anymore because, unlike the picture that most people have of him as being a overweight ogre, in his earlier years he was a very, very fit, muscular man. He loved to ride horses, hunt, play real tennis, and joust. And to say it was jousting that caused the horse to fall on top of him. Henry was getting larger. He was still tucking into the usual amount of food that was expected within the court of Henry, which was 2 banquets a day, average calorie intake of 5,000 calories for each person, and that went down to the servants, to everybody enjoyed the wealth of Henry, because Henry now was wealthy, not healthy, he was wealthy, because he had taken all of the land of the Catholic Church, and that land amounted to almost half of land in the whole country, all of the rents, all of the wealth that came with it. Henry's still taking in 5,000 calories a day, but he's not exercising anymore. And then he gets bigger and he grows. His waist is 50 inches. He weighs around 300 pounds. He's a very big man. And he's a paranoid man, expecting assassins to come from Europe to kill him because of his treatment of Catherine and the Catholic Church in general. And he's in constant pain with his back. So he's not a nice person to be around. His paranoia leads him to execute around 35,000 people who refused to join his new church. They looked at this new Anglican church and wondered why they had to turn their back on the one church that their ancestors had been following for the last 1,500 years. And the word was around that the reason why he dissolved their beloved church was because of a whore, as they called Anne Boleyn. However, Henry, now a big man, he is just marrying or looking around at pretty girls, and his next victim was Catherine Howard, who was 18 years old, very pretty, and very unfortunate to have been grabbed by Henry. And a young pretty girl, she did have affairs, it is said, with a man called Thomas Culpeper. This was found out, and again Henry had her put on trial for adultery. She was found guilty, and she was beheaded as well. And Henry's last wife, Anne of Cleves, I'll come back to that. His sixth wife was his nursemaid. So, Banqueting House, 2 of those weddings took place outside of Banqueting House in Whitehall, in an archway built across the roadway, and that was the weddings of Queen Seymour and of Anne Boleyn. The Whitehall Palace itself, which the road takes its name from, was built again with the enormous amounts of wealth and land that the king now owned. And so he built 60 new palaces during his time in charge with the land that he gained. He wanted to have a palace that competed with the biggest palace in Europe at that time in the 1530s, which was the Palace of Versailles in Paris, just outside Paris. And so that was what Whitehall Palace was built for. It's said it had around 1,700 rooms and ran all the way from Trafalgar Square at the top, which is where the Royal Mews were, where the square is now, right the way down to Parliament Square at the bottom. On the eastern side was the apartments, and on the western side, guard houses, the tennis courts, the jousting yards, the tilt yards. Um, so it's generally split up into two. This enormous precinct, and I am going to leave that there for now because I think it's best, being as I've been going for 15 minutes, that I will then bring the story forward onto Elizabeth and the next century, and how Whitehall Palace had an enormous part of the England that we know today. So I will see you soon.